Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. The fallout from the semiconductor loss with State Senator John Cherry was in his district that suffered the loss. Our lead story, a raucous House session and disarray wins the day. Providing the analysis, we have Beth LeBlanc, Jordan Hermany, and Simon Schuster. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Studio C, Off the Record, as we continue. The Michigan House gets more interesting by the day, does it not? A rather raucous session yesterday, and disarray wins.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we saw a legislative session where they were gavelled in at noon, were in session for more than 6 hours, only to see a couple of agonizing votes come up on the board on key legislative priorities for a number of representatives. Representative Jim DeSena was not in the legislature because he felt that the Republican caucus wasn't moving forward with his priorities. And so they failed to cobble together enough votes to make a majority on these key pieces of legislation. And we saw Representative Al-Abbas Farhat even indicate like he was going to go yes, but then go no on a key priority of Rep. Sarah Leitner's.
He is a Democrat that Speaker Hall was depending on. Remember, Speaker Hall appointed him the Democratic vice chair of approps, which ain't a bad gig. All right. But he also, what he gives, he takes away.
Right. Yeah. Well, he had that gig. I mean, last night he also stripped Farhat of that command after Farhat voted no on the juvenile lifers bill. It would have delved into a very particular topic, which is going back to whether or not people who are 19 and 20 can receive mandatory life sentences as a juvenile individual. As Simon pointed out, it looked like Farhat was going to vote yes. There was a rather tense standoff on the House floor regarding the Democratic Minority Leader Ranjiv Puri and a number of other representatives. At one point, it looked like they were very much in each other's faces, that there was going to be something maybe tumultuous happening there. But in the end, Farhat voted no. Hall stripped him of his post on the Appropriations Committee, and Farhat came out swinging after session, saying that this is the town's in disarray. Frankly, Lansing's in disarray, and I can't help but think that if we think back to 2024, we've seen the song and dance before.
What do you make of all this?
I think it's going to be a long budget season, Tim. I think we're in it for the long haul to
Christmas Eve? Christmas Eve?
I don't know, but yesterday was not encouraging. And, it wasn't just that Hall couldn't get any Democrats to come over and help. It was that he was missing 3 of his own members, including Rep. DeSena, who did it as a sort of statement because they weren't acting on his priorities. And if you're wondering where he learned that behavior, it might have been in last year's lame duck when Republicans walked out of session. So things are really coming around. I saw former Speaker Tate on the House floor last night kind of laughing while all of this was going down. I think it brought up, some remembrances of lame duck last year, and they've got to get it together if they have any hope of passing a budget.
Well, in defense of these House Republicans, every Republican or Democratic caucus that had a narrow margin of control over the years has always faced this problem because 1 or 2 people become mini speakers. They can control the process and, whoa, I got some power here. And DeSena, who marches to his own drummer, no surprise that he would be one that would say, I'm a no-show.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in a hyper-partisan environment where, as you mentioned, these slim majority margins that that Republicans have to deal with here means that you also have to appeal to your right flank. And so as you're trying to cobble together a coalition to get things done, if you can't rely on that right flank, you've got to make compromises with people who are willing to maybe jump across the aisle here. And clearly Republicans wanted to make that happen on the juvenile lifer legislation. But if you listen to Matt Hall, he said that Farhat had agreed and then had second thoughts on an amendment that they had acquiesced to. But then if you listen to Farhat say, he said he had never said yes on the legislation.
Which makes our job so interesting because where's the truth between those two?
Well, exactly. And, I can't help but think whether or not Matt Hall, House Speaker Matt Hall, went home after yesterday and maybe he's rethinking the style of leadership. I mean, for what it's worth, all all year we have seen name calling, we have seen finger pointing, we have seen him call, for instance, the House Minority Leader Ranjiv Puri weak, ineffective, useless. I mean, Puri really flexed his muscles last night. For Democrats, this arguably was a win. It showed that they could keep their caucus together, that they could spike major priorities for Republicans, and they could kind of turn around and say, now what are you going to do if you can't rely on us, because you clearly can't rely on your own caucus? I mean, will he go home and change his leadership style? No, I'm under no delusion. But, I mean, it's definitely worth some thought here as to whether this antagonistic and bullish nature is going to net him more wins as the year continues and the clock ticks down to our budget deadline.
Yeah, I think Jordan's making a great point here, because when you're in the House Minority Caucus, you essentially have, as the leader, one big ability, which is acting as that stopper. The idea that you're not going to let your side bleed and let them cobble together these bipartisan coalitions. And I think Puri definitely offered a refutation of some of that criticism Hall has lobbed his way.
Well, but that's a ticking time bomb for him as well, because he's got people in his caucus who could walk on him in a moment.
That's very true.
Yeah, all right. What's happening on MEDC? Bring us up to date.
Well, the investigation is ongoing, but I feel like the most recent news is that the MEDC Executive Committee, which oversees operations and is made up of appointees of Governor Gretchen Whitmer, they met earlier this week in Traverse City, just about as far away from Lansing as you can get. And
Marquette was closed.
And they spoke no word of the fact that the agency they oversee was raided a month ago.
This, of course, is the $20 million grant that's being investigated by the Attorney General. She says there is, quote, probable cause that a crime was committed. But are you surprised that they didn't do their dirty wash out in public? I mean, if you're smart, keep your mouth shut.
Well, I mean, who's their duty to? Is their duty to the governor, or is it to the taxpayers who fund the agency that they oversee? And if their agency has been raided by law enforcement, if there is a criminal investigation into a grant that they oversaw, I think their duty is to the taxpayer to tell them what they're doing to address this.
Well,
and they didn't.
You talked to the director. What did he say?
I did. I talked to the MEDC CEO, Quentin Messer. He defended the work of the agency in administering this grant, essentially indicating that his hands were tied in terms of administration because of the way the legislature wrote that budget bill and wrote that grant. But, you know, I think there are a lot of questions about, you know, what level of involvement his agency had, because Beydoun, the recipient of this grant, met with his agency repeatedly in the year leading up to that grant about the possibility of getting that grant. So his agency was well aware that she was pursuing this.
But his quote was interesting. He said they complied with the oversight guidelines of the legislature. That was not a denial that we didn't do anything wrong, was it?
He said, yes, that they complied. This has been the MEDC's argument for close to 2 years now, that they are tied by the language that the legislature put in that budget. And it is true. I mean, I think when we wrote about that budget in the Grant Senate, we had a quote in the headline calling it shady as hell. And I mean, the grants that they put through there were meant to not have a significant amount of oversight. But the MEDC, they canceled the grant in March based on issues that they knew about for a full year. And so there's a question of what tipped the scales here? What caused you to cancel the grant? Because they did, in the legislative language, have the ability to cancel the grant earlier, and they didn't for close to a year.
Yeah, I think what's important to note is that the MEDC has a level of independence that's beyond regular state agencies. And they have like one single core purpose, which is sort of the stewardship and administration of economic development dollars. And I think one of the holes that in Quentin Messer's explanation here is that if we have to say that, you know, the legislature gives us some money, they want us to administer it, that we don't have any sort of mandate to provide oversight or stewardship beyond what's written out in a budget, I think is a difficult argument to make.
So would that mean that if somebody came into the MEDC and robbed them, that they couldn't report on that because it wasn't in the oversight committee language, or do I digress? All right, I did have an opportunity to talk to the Attorney General the other day, and I asked her, is the governor involved here? And here was her quote, "Look, I have no idea of the extent of anybody's involvement here," end quote. Then I asked, how about somebody in her office, namely the chief of staff, quote, "All I will say is that we don't have any specific targets of the investigation." Interpret that for me.
Tim, I'm going to let her words stand on their own on that one.
Very good. You want to go into politics. You want to take a shot at that or no?
I mean, I think I'd say that criminal investigations aren't jazz. It's not like a free-form improvisational exercise where like there's an abstract notion of something that's going on. If there's not sort of an idea of wrongdoing committed by a specific party, I don't think anyone would initiate a criminal investigation.
All right, money is in. Ms. Benson did pretty well, didn't she?
Yeah, you know, she reported, I believe it was something over $3.5 million, around $3.5 million of a fundraising haul. I mean, out the gate, that's a pretty big get.
History making.
History making, indeed. You know, we're still seeing some of the other numbers flow in for other candidates at the moment. You know, there will be money definitely on the Republican side. The DeVosses have already, I believe it was John James has said that they're going to give about $5 million to his campaign as well. So we can expect a rather large fundraising haul out of him as well. But yeah, I mean, it definitely puts her out in front of the pack and makes a statement.
Yeah, you know, and I think what's important to note, like why these numbers matter when we're still more than a year from the primaries on both sides, is that Benson is at minimum accrued more than 3 times the amount that Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson has, and Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist reported about $750,000. And so the difference here is we're seeing.
You describe that as sort of chump change.
Unfortunately, when the prior, winning governor raised $36 million over the course of her last campaign, it is a relatively small amount. And what I think this telegraphs is the level of grassroots support and the amount of national profile that these people have. The Secretary of State has benefited from being in one of the most heated and contested elections in Michigan's history in 2020, and as a result, developed an enormous national profile that these other candidates can't benefit from.
Well, and it's another thing, too, to show that if Republicans, I mean, if we'll recall in the state legislature, Secretary Benson has been pulled in front of the legislature a couple times now, either her staff or her specifically, to discuss, for instance, the the campaign finance portal that has had a shaky start, the records requests and subpoenas that she's been issued, and if this is any attempt at trying to diminish potential star power here in the field, it's very clearly not working.
I think, too, one interesting tell is going to be when Duggan eventually submits his reports and everything. I think, there's been doubts that fundraising or support could be diminished by Duggan's presence in the race as an independent. And I think this is a good tell that, in fact, Benson is able to fundraise just as much, if not more, than any Democratic candidate before.
And I think to Beth's point, too, Mike Duggan as an independent is not going to have that traditional political apparatus that's going to help him, like the Democratic Governors Association or the Republican Governors Association. So he has to show that he can perform above and beyond a traditional candidate. But then again, also the way he's fundraised as a candidate historically has primarily been through external vehicles. He's had 501c4 nonprofit accounts, so-called dark money accounts, support both of his runs for mayor. And if you've driven around on Michigan highways lately, you've seen billboards saying that he's America's most effective mayor. That's from another 501c4 account not connected to his campaign.
All right, very quickly, before we call in our guest to talk about the semiconductor story, is the governor got her $50 million from her friend in the White House. What's that guy's, Mr. Trump? Huh?
Yeah, for disaster relief up north, the governor did secure some money to aid in these storm cleanups. It's a big get.
Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a big get. I think they're still gunning for more for up north. I think they've clocked the losses at about $137 million, perhaps even higher. So they're still in need of more aid, but it's an initial step for that community.
It bought her the headline which she wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it plays to Whitmer's strengths, which is as a retail politician. It helps when you have the president's cell phone number. But at the same time, she's fighting against an administrative posture that says states, for the most part, should be on the hook themselves for this emergency repairs.
And what she didn't say, but what she thought was, what does everybody in town who think I was going the wrong direction think now? If I dare put words in the governor's mouth, no. Let's call in Senator Cherry. Senator, please. Come on in, man. Off the record, your friend Matt Hall had some unkind things to say in his news conference yesterday. Basically said that you weren't in on this deal to begin with, didn't know what was going on. And secondly, for you to blame Donald Trump is just absolutely, positively wrong.
Then what's the question, Tim?
Is he right?
Well, what we've heard from the company told the state, we've heard from the governor, it's been reported, is the company said that Michigan is where they wanted to locate their $63 billion semiconductor manufacturing facility, and they have decided they're not going to build it anywhere in the United States because of national economic uncertainty, et cetera. So what that says is Michigan won this project, and unfortunately, the United States lost it.
Because?
National economic uncertainty.
Well, I didn't hear you use the word Donald Trump in that answer.
I think there's lots of blame to go around, including Congress, who's been just saying yes to everything that's happened nationally.
But do you hold the president accountable for losing this thing?
I think the administration does bear some responsibility.
Does the Biden administration bear responsibility as well? I mean, they had the opportunity to approve some of this CHIPS funding on their way out the door.
Yeah, absolutely. They did have the opportunity. I think this went to the CHIPS office like, August, September last year. They could have approved it, and they should have.
So then who here shares, I guess, that blame? Because it seems to be that a lot of folks right now are pointing fingers at the president, but in acknowledging that the former Biden administration also shares. I mean, was this just simply a long time coming? Would this have happened regardless, in your opinion?
As I said, we know Michigan won this competition. And quite frankly, it's really disheartening. It's hurtful that we're not going to get this, because what we're talking about here, 10,000 jobs. Back many years ago, Flint used to be, and Genesee County used to have the best quality of life in our country, some of the highest incomes in our country, and that was based on good quality manufacturing jobs. Well, today, when we're talking about high-paying manufacturing jobs, that's advanced manufacturing, and then there's no more advanced manufacturing than semiconductor manufacturing. This is the type of thing that is transformative, not just for a community, but for our state.
So then what kind of conversations, if any, are being had right now? It's my understanding that the site is still being developed to eventually have a potential something come in there. I mean, if you could pull the switch tomorrow, what's the hope here? Another semiconductor factory, or?
Yeah, certainly. So what we've also heard, and what we know to be the case, is that Michigan and Genesee County has the best site in our nation for semiconductor manufacturing. 1,400 acres, unprecedented access to water, 85 million gallons of water a day coming straight from Lake Huron via the Kirin-Gandhi pipeline, 3 R1 research universities within 45 minutes, half a dozen freeway exits to 2 international interstates right within 5 minutes, an international airport within 5 minutes, and rail access. We have heard from site selectors, we've heard from the company, SanDisk. We have the best site in the nation. So once things get worked out at the federal level, we should be at the top of the list to land that type of manufacturing here.
Our colleague Paula Gardner recently reported that the state was prepared to offer up in a total incentives package up to $6 billion for this. I'm curious, do you think that's a fair amount to pay for a single project that's going to have relatively localized economic impact?
I don't agree that it's relatively localized economic impact. I think it's really statewide economic impact when we're talking about 10,000 jobs and bringing an entirely new industry to our state. That being said, the way that I approach looking at whether or not incentives make sense, generally, I don't like incentives. I don't think most people do, right? But the world that we're living in is that's a reality that states have to deal with. So when we look at other states that have received these massive multi-billion-dollar semiconductor facilities, New York and Micron, Ohio, Arizona, you look at all of them, and they have some sort of state incentive package. So the way that I approach is I'm going to look at what has Michigan offered. Is it comparable to what these other states are offering, or better? Better for the taxpayer, that is? Or are we doing something excessive? And we're still going through, I don't sign NDAs, so I don't have all the minute details of what the offer was, but we've read your reporting. It's been good. And so we're digesting some of that and looking at what those other states are doing. I haven't gotten to the full detail of New York's offer, but the headline number was $10 billion in New York. Yeah. So,
you're, as a Senate Democrat, they're working with House Republicans right now, attempting to get a budget done and also a roads deal. House Republicans' roads deal would essentially empty out these economic development accounts. Does that mean that, if that happens, that these sort of deals where you can offer these multi-billion-dollar incentive packages are off the table?
Well, it's tough to say what the House Republicans are doing because they haven't passed a budget yet. They're 3 months late.
They have passed a roads package.
But a roads package means nothing when you're doing $3 billion worth of fund shifts and you're not saying where the money's coming from in the fund shifts, right? So
well, they have shown that it's going to empty out these corporate incentive accounts.
They've repealed, in their package, they repeal the mega tax credits that occurred decades ago.
Mm-hmm. As an observer of this process, and you come from roots that your dad knew a little something about legislating, I assume he shared some of his wisdom. How would you describe the current situation in the Michigan House vis-a-vis the leadership of the Speaker?
It seems to be, based off of what I saw last night, ineffective.
Why?
Well, they seem to have
Why
trouble.
are you smiling?
No, they seem to have trouble getting stuff across the line, right? But quite frankly, it doesn't surprise me that they haven't passed a budget yet. Even though we're 3 months late from the normal process in the House. Because if you look at what Speaker Hall has been doing, they've been spending their time passing these messaging bills that you mentioned some of it, but. Irresponsible tax cuts, $3 billion worth of fund shifts, hundreds of millions of dollars, $100 million earmarks, and quite frankly, you can't fit all those messaging bills into a budget he can get out of the chamber. So I'm not surprised he's having trouble.
Senator, the offer packages for Michigan, for Micron, which chose New York, for SanDisk, which abandoned the project, they have been largely comparable, if not more, than what New York was offering or other states. Why is Michigan losing these projects?
Well, like I said, Michigan won this project. It's the United States that lost it. So we got to sort out the stuff at the federal level, and that's what it's going to take to make sure we advance here.
Well, they never signed an agreement with the state.
They submitted us as the entity, the location they intended to build their manufacturing facility at when they applied for CHIPS Act dollars.
So is there a possibility that this project, this specific one, could be resurrected?
That's an answer. I don't have the question. That's a question you have to ask to the company.
What does your gut tell you?
Likely not. I mean, they said they're not going to build a facility like this in the United States at this time.
Senator, there's a proposal right now to use state funding through the local economic development agency to purchase a Swartz Creek school for $40 million, to destroy it because it's in the pathway of that mega site, and then to rebuild one elsewhere. Where do you stand on that? Do you think state money should be used to basically shut down a school and move it elsewhere?
So, yeah, the proposal is that they give the school district $40 million to build a brand new elementary school. I think most school districts in the state would love $40 million to build a brand new elementary school to replace one that's 50, 60 years old.
But would Michigan taxpayers love it?
I think what we're talking about here is making sure that we are able to get a generational investment for the people of the state of Michigan. And what does that mean? It means about having prosperous communities, prosperous families. It's about being able to have your kids stay in Michigan and have careers that can support families. I think the people of the state of Michigan want that type of economic development in the state of Michigan.
Senator, I would like to return to the budget for a second.
Yeah.
We've already mentioned that Senate Democrats have passed their version of a budget. House Republicans have not yet, but have passed a roads plan. And it appears the snafu is what to do with the roads plan. In your opinion, just a yes or no answer, are we headed for a government shutdown?
I'm not going to give a yes or no answer. What I'll say is this: I don't think that when you're 3 months late on beginning the budget process like the House is, and when the Speaker's been talking about a government shutdown since he came into office, I think that points to the direction that we're headed.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Are you not on the subcommittee for the MEDC?
No. Yes, I am. I am on the subcommittee over. Yes,
so what do you make of what's going on over there?
Are you referring to the Faye Baydoun?
Well, let's start with that and work backwards, okay?
Yeah, well, first, I wasn't on the subcommittee when all that happened. I was in the minority in the House. But the Attorney General has, begun a criminal investigation. I don't want Michigan taxpayer funds to be misspent. So if there's any thing that's happening incorrectly or anything illegal that's happening, I think it should be prosecuted. The Attorney General has been very aggressive in pursuing these types of criminal complaints, and I expect that she will be aggressive in rooting out anything that should not have happened as she goes through her investigation.
I'm curious on that note, given that you're on the committee that's tasked with oversight of this body, what do you think about MEDC CEO Quentin Messer's explanation that essentially they don't have control over where the money goes, but that they did everything that was dictated to them by the legislature in terms of oversight of these funds?
Yeah, right now the Attorney General is conducting her investigation. I want to see what the results of that investigation is and learn from it to see what changes we need to make, because this shouldn't be happening in the first place, right? So what we need to do is, whatever the results of that investigation is, take those results, understand why it happened, and then make changes going forward to make sure it doesn't happen in the future.
I mean, but Beth has reported that they bought a $4,500 coffee machine. Do you think that's something that should raise a red flag within the agency?
Yeah.
Do you think they should have shut down the money earlier when they first heard about that?
If they knew that the money was spent on that type of expenditure, my hope would be they would not continue to expend dollars.
Who's your candidate for governor?
I've not endorsed anybody for governor.
You have somebody in your district, I think, running for governor.
I think I do.
Yeah. Well,
he's a good guy.
Well, yeah. Was that an endorsement?
I'm not making an endorsement. I've worked with all these candidates. I think they're all excellent. And whoever we end up nominating, I think they'll be a great governor.
Are you going to endorse?
Once the primary's over.
There's some profiles of courage, right? Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks for doing our program, very much, sir. More of Off the Record right here next week. See you then.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.